right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're excited to have you, and I'm excited to hear today's webinar, which we'll talk about shortly. And also, I'm very grateful for Technion Data Solutions hosting these webinars. In fact, Technion, as you can see here, is a proud partner of multiple different platforms, which to me is really exciting because all of these can work together in incredible ways to bring incredible value to people as they think about exploring their data and understanding it and making decisions based on it. So you'll see things like Warescape, which automates data warehousing, Data Robot, which automates artificial intelligence and predictions, Tableau, which does visual analytics and dashboards and data storytelling, Alteryx, which does an incredible job at predictive models, geospatial models, data blending, bringing all of that together and has some incredible new features that we'll talk about in the future. And then Snowflake, which is an incredible cloud-based platform for hosting your data. So I love it when we can use these things together, and Technion brings together the best in class of all of these different platforms. So thanks to Technion for hosting these. If anyone out there has any data issues that they'd like help with, we'd love to help you with that. So feel free to reach out. A little bit of housekeeping up front. There will be a Q&A at the end, but feel free to type in your questions as we go. There's a place on your webinar where you should be able to type those in. Feel free to do that as you think of them, but we'll try to get to them at the end. Also, there will be a recording available. You should get an email when it is, but if you're anxious and want to check ahead of time, or you want to check out past recordings, there is a link there, so technionusa.com/video. I am excited to hear from Dina today. Dina is an Alteryx Ace, which is the highest honor bestowed by Alteryx for people who have shown not only incredible technical capabilities with Alteryx, but also who were involved in helping others in the community. Dina heads up the user group and has been instrumental in Alteryx for Good. She's done just an incredible job with the Alteryx community, and then bridging out to the broader data community that we have. I'm Joshua Milligan, so I'm happy to do the introduction, but I'm going to turn it over to Dina now. She is going to talk about building analytical apps in Alteryx, which is just an incredible feature, and so I'm excited to see what she has to share.
Excellent. Thank you, Joshua. And let me know if you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate that very much. As Josh mentioned, I'm an Alteryx Ace and very honored to receive that designation. And Josh is a Zen Master for Tableau. So Josh is also one of those few people out there who have attained the Zen Master status, and he really is a whiz at what he can do in Tableau, not just with visualizations, but with what he can do just with data prep going into Tableau as well. And on that note, feel free to come by and see us if you are going to the Tableau conference in late October. This will be in New Orleans. Come by the Technion booth. Josh and I will be discussing data prep and using Alteryx and Tableau in data prep and in visualization. So feel free to come by and see us if you're able to come. We would love to talk with you, and let us know if you're one of those people that join us on our webinars. We'd love to meet you in person. So with that, I'm going to show you today Analytic Apps in Alteryx. And Josh, let me know if you can see the Alteryx screen here. I have an app up in Alteryx.
It looks perfect on my screen.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I'm going to show you today something really cool about Alteryx. And I have to mention, this is something that's out of the box when you buy Alteryx Designer. This is not an add-on. This is not an additional bundle that you purchase or anything like that. This is actually a set of tools called the interface tools in Alteryx, just in Basic Designer. I've been using these for years, and you'll hear me say over and over again, Alteryx is my favorite software. It's like a video game for me. I get to solve puzzles and create solutions and level up every time I solve something. So with that, one of my favorite things about Alteryx is Analytic Apps. So they're really neat. It's a really cool function. And as I like to say, they make your life easier. They certainly have for me, and I'll show you why. So you're probably asking, what are Analytic Apps in Alteryx? And they're a really neat function. So apps are made with these interface tools, and I'm actually going to create a few apps today using a portion of these tools. With the time limit, we don't have time to go through all these tools, but I'll show you a few of them and how they work, and I'll show you what an app is. So I've got a workflow here. It creates a map and a demographic report, and I'm just going to quickly run it using my Run Workflow button up here, this little green play button. I'm just going to go ahead and run that and have it run. And I do want to say, anytime you're building an app, you start with a workflow. So this is really an example that's already built, but you'll see in the next exercises we do, it always starts with a workflow that's working properly. So always run your workflow first, make sure there's no errors, make sure the output is exactly what you're looking for. And with this, I have an output here. It's just a PDF. It shows a map with an address on it, a drive time. It's got today's date on it, and then a canned demographic report that comes with it. So nice and simple, and I verified, yes, this is working. The cool thing about apps is I've actually added these interface tools, and I've created an interface for myself or for an end user. So with apps, this is actually what you create. You're making a nice little pop-up interface. You can actually put whatever you like here. It's really up to you, the Alteryx designer, or data artisan, as we like to call ourselves with Alteryx. It's up to you how you design this interface. I put some tabs here, let them choose their trade area drive time minutes, let them enter the name of a report, let the end user enter an address. So this is really what the interface tools do. They create what you would call a set of questions for your end user. And your end user, which can also be yourself, will answer those questions or enter in data. And as you enter in the data, it's actually performing actions on the tools inside of your workflow, and then having those actions affect the workflow, modify the tools, and then update them. And then out comes your updated information. So with that first report, you saw that the address was, 2000 Flora Street, I believe, which should be, the address of the Opera House in Dallas. So I'm a big fan of the Dallas Opera. So I'm going to advertise and say, hey, look at this. This is their address here. But with this app, I'm going to just run as Analytic App. I've got a new address, just Main Street in Dallas. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to change that trade area to maybe 15 minutes. And I'm going to say, let's make this a new area report. And then I'll click Finish. And so this app is going in, using the interface tools and modifying the trade area here with the app interface tools. It's modifying the name of the report. It's changing my location. And with that, I'm going to get a new output based on this new information that I inserted into the app using the interface I created. What apps do, they modify and perform actions on your existing workflow and allow you or another end user to make changes. So now I've got my new area report, new address here, changed the drive time, and then it updated that with the updated demographic information for that new drive time, for that new address. So it's really cool to be able to do this in Alteryx. You can just make these apps and you can actually share them with others. So the really neat thing about apps is that you can actually share them through the server. So if you have Alteryx server, you can actually share apps using what's called the gallery on the Alteryx server. And the gallery has a really cool name. It's really kind of a showcase for those data artisans to showcase their work in the gallery. And I'll show you a little bit about the gallery at the end of this and show what apps look like actually on the gallery. So you can actually do it through your server, and as long as someone has a seat for the gallery in your server, they can access these apps. The really neat thing is they can have a seat on the server for the gallery, but not necessarily have Alteryx. So you can actually share this with end users that don't have Alteryx at all, and all they would see is simply the app come up using the interface for the gallery, click and enter their information, click run, and out comes their report or their data download or their table or whatever else your imagination is capable of, as long as you can put it in a workflow. So that's really a real benefit of having analytic apps on your server in Alteryx, is where you can actually share those apps with others. Again, the people only need a seat on the gallery on your server. They don't ever have to see the workflow behind the scenes or how that's working. They simply see this interface that pops up. They enter their information, click finish, and then they get their output. It's that simple, and this could really automate things for you and really make your life more efficient in many ways. So for example, if you have some ad hoc processes or requests that are happening over and over again, such as in this example, if someone needs a map in a report, but it's a new address every time, say you might be in the site selection retail industry, you can create an app, and then simply you or the end user who's requesting the map enter the address and fill out the rest of the information and click go, and they instantly get their report. You saw how quickly that ran. In less than a minute, they get that report. And this way, they don't have to wait for you to take time to create the map, modify your workflow, click on the trade area here, change it to 15 minutes, for example, and so on. You can actually make it so easy for them to log into the gallery and run their own report, and then you actually never have to have that request. So that really saved me multiple times when I was in the retail industry, and I made this app for myself, something very similar to it, and just ran those apps offhand at an ad hoc request, and it was nice and easy. So as long as they have access to the server, they can do that. There's also another option where you can have it cloud hosted by Alteryx. So I actually did that for many years when I was in the retail industry. I actually used Alteryx to host the gallery for me. And so it was not on server. I only had Alteryx Designer. But I would make these apps. They'd be hosted by Alteryx on their cloud. And then my end users could log in and actually run the apps themselves as long as they had an internet connection. So the cool thing about it is, as long as you have even an iPad with an internet connection, log into the gallery hosted by Alteryx, run your app and get your report in just minutes sometimes. So that's really one of the huge benefits of apps. And one of the main reasons I propose using them is it really does make things automated for you and efficient. You can also actually share with others who have Alteryx. So if you create apps such as this, you can actually save this entire app, send them the workflow, they can open the workflow, run the apps themselves straight through Alteryx. So they don't have to run it on the server or a cloud-hosted gallery. If they have Alteryx Designer, they can run the app also. You just package that app and send it over to them. So that's really another huge benefit, is you can create all sorts of ways to automate things for yourselves and others, and then just share them. And that's really the beauty of the apps, is being able to share that information and let others pull that data for themselves and create those reports for themselves. So as I mentioned, you actually start with a workflow. So I'm actually going to build some apps for you. And I'm going to start with just a basic workflow. This one finds top spenders in a segment. And you can see I've got a customer transaction file here, some information here on the store number. There's a segment field that we need to pay attention to, name and address and so on, visits and spend. We're going to filter by the segment. So right now the filter tool is showing small business, which is what the segment equals. So we see here in our basic filter, segment equals small business. So we're going to allow the end user to change that. They're going to be able to use that filter, modify it using an action tool and using a drop-down, and they can choose the segment they want to filter on. You can see it sorts the records by highest spenders and makes a YXDB. So with all apps, I want to start with a working workflow. So I'm always going to run that workflow and check it, make sure it is creating the output that I'm expecting it to before I modify this and make this into an app. So you can see here, I clicked on the YXDB top spenders output, and I've got 10 records, I've got customer ID and store number and spend, and the segment is small business. So that looks exactly like what I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do for the interface tools to actually change this is I'm going to swipe over all of my workflow, and I'm going to bring it down a few levels. So with interface tools, I always add about 2 tool heights above the regular tools, so you can actually have room to start making your analytic app. So with Analytic Apps, you'll be using most of these tools here, but then you'll also need an action tool. For most of your Analytic App interface tools, you will need an action tool to perform that action on the standard workflow tool. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So the cool thing is I'm actually going to first look at the segments and say, all right, I've got a list of segments here. If I look at my data, I can see a few of them here, home office, consumer, and small business. But I want to know, what are all the segments? I want to create a list of segments so that the end user can use that as a drop-down and change the filter so it changes from small business to what the end user chooses in their drop-down. So a really easy way to do that is my summarize tool. So I'm going to summarize here, and I'm going to add it to my true output. And I'm just going to bring that below so I still have room for all of those analytic app tools or interface tools that I'm going to show in just a moment. So I'm going to group by customer segment just so I can see a list of those segments and make sure I'm including all of them in my drop-down tool that I'm about to add. So I'm going to run this again really quickly. And actually, I did filter on small business, so it only shows a segment of small business. So I'm actually going to back up a moment, and I'm going to actually do that from the main in data set there instead of the filter. So I was focusing on that filter for that dropdown. So now you can see there's 4 in my output, and these are the 4 segments: consumer, corporate, home office, and small business. So I want to give an interface to the end user so they can use these 4 as a drop-down and change that filter from small business to whatever they choose. So to do that, I'm actually going to go back to my interface tools, and I want to add a drop-down tool. So I'm going to add it about 2 heights above the filter tool and create this drop-down. So in the drop-down interface, you can actually start typing what you would like the end user to see. So this is where you see on the left in the configuration, enter the text or question to be displayed. So as I mentioned, you're really setting up a set of questions for your end user. And so you want to type a question that the end user will understand and know what to type or select in this. So for this one, I'm going to put select the customer segment to report on. And then in my list of values, you can see there's a lot of options here. Analytic apps really are more of an advanced option in Alteryx. You can start with some simple ones, but you do have a lot of advanced options here. You can do fields from a connected tool. You can do an external source with name and value fields. This time we're actually going to do manually set values. So we just want to say we want to manually set what those drop-down items are for that end user to use. So going back to my interface here, I could start typing consumer if I want to, and so on. But I'll give you a real quick shortcut to do that. So instead of manually typing those in, since you summarize those in the summarize tool, you actually just have them right here. So you have a customer segment, and you have your 4 options right here for your segment. you can go over here to your results of your browse tool and copy results to the clipboard. So we're going to copy the records without headers. And now they're copied to the clipboard. And again, I did this without headers. So now I can just right click and paste. And there's my 4 items that I'm going to use for my dropdown. So that's just a quick hint on one of the many amazing things you can do with the Browse tool. You can copy data, you can save straight from the Browse tool, you can open it in a new window, you can even select within the Browse tool and create a subset. But enough about the Browse tool for now. It is one of my favorite tools there. So on the default selection name, partial OK, I'm going to type consumer. So with that, this way the end user sees something they can choose from kind of as a default. It kind of prompts them of what they're looking for that dropdown. So now that I've got this configuration of my dropdown set up, I'm actually going to add an action tool. So again, an action performs an action such as an update to your existing standard workflow tools. So you have your question here in your dropdown. Now I'm going to add an action in between. So you can see that when you add an action tool to the canvas for your interface tools, it automatically connects. So your queue or question output connects to your queue input for the action tool. And your lightning bolt or your action output connects to the lightning bolt or action for the filter tool. So we're going to have update value for our action tool. So we're going to keep that as the default. But you can see there's other actions. You can even get into the raw XML with a formula. You can update the value with a formula. But for this, we're just going to update value as a default. And so we have small business in our filter tool. And with this, we actually want to do an update to the operand. So we want to say the value is small business. So that's one of the key things about Analytic Apps is when you start getting into the action tool, you really start getting into the coding behind the scenes. So now you can actually see what's happening in a filter tool. You can actually see the raw XML behind it. You can see really what's happening with the operators. The value is equal. You can see my operands and my start date and end date, and my value is small business. So small business is what I'd like to update using that dropdown. Right now, the filter is filtering for small business for the customer segment. And I want to allow the end user to change that. So when I click on operand value equals small business, you can see here where it says replace a specific string, small business appears. It's grayed out. You can check that box if you want to, but if it looks exactly the way you want for what you're going to update in the filter tool, you do not need to have this box checked. It's actually just filling it in as it should with the segment of small business. If you do ever need to take out part of a string or modify a string, you can click on this replace a specific string and say take out business, for example, if that's what you needed to take out. But for this, we do need small business in there since it is one of the drop-down options. So again, when you click on what you're replacing, which is value equals small business, and it puts it here in your specific string area correctly, you do not need to check this box. So only check the box if you really need to modify what string you're replacing. So now that I've got my action tool here for small business, this is going to update the value in this filter, which is currently filtering on small business, and it's going to update it with whatever segment the end user chooses from the dropdown. I'm going to add actually one more interface tool just for fun. This is a really neat one. It's a numeric up-down. So I'm going to actually allow the end user to select the number of customers per store using a drop-down tool. So right now we've got, the parameters set where it's just kind of sorting the records by highest spender. We get the top spender for each of the stores by store number. Right now it's first, in rows equals 1. And we want to actually change that. So we want to be able to change what's in the sample tool. And instead of finding the first N equals 1 by store number, we want to allow the end user to change that number. They can do top 10 or top 20, however they want to do that. So to do that, I'm going to add a numeric up-down. I'm going to put it right here above my sample tool. And for my configuration, I want to change the question to set the number of customers per store. So this kind of prompts the end user. This is their question that they have to answer. And for my minimum, I'm going to set that to 1. I'm going to keep my maximum at 100. So with this, you can actually cap what your end user puts in. They can't put 1,000, for example. I'm going to leave the increment at 1, and I'm going to change the default to 10. So default's what's going to show in the placeholder when the end user uses the app. So you can see here with the numeric up down, you have a lot of control over what the end user is able to do. So you can set your mins and max. You can even increment by 1 or 5 or 10, for example, and you can even set your decimal places. So now that I've got my numeric up down configured, again, I want to add an action tool because I want to perform that action on the sample tool. So I'm going to add this action tool here. You can see the questions connect to the question input. The action output connects to the action input for your standard workflow tool. So with update value, we're going to keep that as a default. And then for the value to update, we just want to say n value equals 1. So currently, the sample tool has it set to n equals 1. We want to be able to change that. So if you click on value equals 1, you can see here at the bottom, replace a specific string is set to 1. It's grayed out, but that's exactly what we want to update, so we don't have to check that checkbox. So we can leave it nice and simple. So now we've got 2 interface tools here. We've created an app, and the neat thing about when you create an app, as soon as you add an interface tool to this option, to the workflow, it will actually change your workflow. So if you click anywhere on your white space, you get to your workflow configuration window, and you can see as soon as you've added an interface tool to the canvas, it changes to an analytic app. So this knows that it's an app, and when you save it, it actually saves to a YXWZ. And I'll tell you a little bit about why it does that. It's a little bit of trivia about Alteryx of why that extension is YXWZ instead of YXMD for workflow. MD actually stands for module. And in the old days, when I started using Alteryx way back when, I've actually been using it since 2005, these were actually called modules instead of workflows. So that's why you see YX for Alteryx and MD for module. But when I run this and I show you how the output is, I'll explain why it changes to a YXWZ. So when I save this, I'm actually going to save this option, save right here. And it's going to say YXWZ, and it's going to have Analytic Apps as its extension. So I'm going to actually save this one. And you can see I've been using it before, so I've already got one. The reason it saves as a YXWZ is in the old days when Alteryx first began and you started using Analytic Apps, they were actually called wizards. So this was actually creating a wizard for you to use. So that's why you have that WZ extension. It's also why you have a little wand that comes up here right next to your Run Workflow button. And this little wand icon is Run as Analytic App. So the reason you have a wand icon is because you were creating a wizard. So now you all know when you go to the Alteryx conference and someone asks you that question, now you know why there's a wand and why it's a WZ extension there. I always had a lot of fun saying, I want to make a wizard, or I want to be a wizard in Alteryx. So now you actually are able to create those. So now you can see when I click that Run as Analytic App wand, here's my interface. So I get this nice little pop-up. You can see my questions, select the customer segment, select the number of customers. If you remember from our action tool, we had a default of consumer, but now we have the drop-down. So now the end user can choose another segment to report on. They can increment by 1 to do number of customers per store, and then click Finish. But before I do that, I want to show you the interface tools for the interface designer. So this is where you, as the data artisan, get to actually design the tools. So to actually see your interface designer and make changes to this interface that pops up, you actually go to View and then Interface Designer. So this is not usually used unless you're designing apps. But you'll see a pop-up window happen here, usually under your results window. And I'm going to just kind of bring that results window down so you don't have to see that too much. And you can see the workflow behind. You can actually make changes here. So I can click on questions. I can even rename, there we go, my tab. So I'm going to say customer segment report for my tab. When I click apply, which is this little button down here at the bottom left of your configuration window, it will actually apply, and now you can see it in my interface designer. So it's really easy to make your changes in your interface designer. You can actually change your questions. So if I said select the customer segment to report on, I can click here for my drop down and I get that configuration window again. So I can actually click here and make changes even in my interface designer. I can actually even add a label to give a little more instruction to that end user to help prompt them on what happens with this report. So in my designer, and I can actually click on add. You can do a group box, you can do a tab, which you probably saw from my first app that I showed with the map and demographic report. I had 3 different tabs there. You can also add a label. So I'm going to just type here my text to be displayed in my label, and I'm going to say create a report on the customers who spent the most. And I'm going to say in each store from the selected segment. So now I've got a really descriptive label here. So it's really going to let the end user know what to do with that. But when I've created it, it's down here at the bottom. So I want to move that to the top just to kind of prompt the end user as they create these. So all I have to do is click on my up arrow and it will actually move the label up. So now I've got a tab, I've got some instructions for the end user, I've got a drop down for that customer segment, and then I've got a number of customers per store. So I've created this interface and designed it for my end user. So now that I've got that created, I can click save, and then I can actually just run, and now you can see my changes. So this is the app that the end user will see. They've got some nice descriptive information here. You can click on a segment. I'm going to click on corporate. I'm going to change it to 5 customers per store. And then I'm going to click finish. So you can see your progress comes up. You get that YXDB for top spenders that you had created as your output. And then click OK. And then there's your output. And you can see per store, there's 5 per store here. So for store 100, I've got these top customers per segment. I chose my corporate segment. And then for the next 5, and so on. So again, it's really nice and easy. You can create all sorts of output. You're actually not limited to a YXDB. So I'm actually going to change this close this interface designer just to save space. But for your output, you can actually set it to where it's not just the YXDB that I have right here. I can actually change this to any output that Alteryx is capable of. So I've got it set to an Alteryx database, but you've got all these other options with Alteryx. I can make it output to a CSV, to an Excel file, all sorts of information, even to a Tableau data extract. So all of these options that you have here for your regular output tool, these are options for Alteryx as well when you use them inside an analytic app. I just simply have it set to a YXDB right now. So that's actually your first analytic app that you can see how you create it and how you can make the interface, and then you can actually share that with others. So in a little bit, I'll show you the gallery and how you share these. But you can actually even use this just for yourself. If you want to save yourself a bunch of time, not have to go in and click on the tool, change the configuration, and so on, change it to customer segment equals something else and type that. Now you've got an app you can just use yourself, and it runs in seconds, and you have your output. So again, that's one of the great benefits of using these apps. So you can actually make your own life easier. This next one, I'm going to show a user entry form. So with the other app that we used, it had an input that was set. It was pulling from one table, from one input, and it didn't change. But you can actually change your user input with some text input, and I'll also show you how you change it using a file browse tool. So you can actually allow the end user to browse to their own data set and then perform the actions of the workflow on that data set, which is really cool. But for this really easy and simple example right here, I've just got a text input. I've got a field that says name. Name is John Doe. And then I've got an output. It's going to be called test.yxtb. Really simple workflow. Just two tools there. So I'm going to make a little modification to it. And I'm going to bring it down here. And I'm going to add those interface tools. So again, before I add the tools, I want to run this workflow and make sure it's running properly, that there's no errors, nothing going on that I have to debug. So you can see it ran just fine. It's got the test YXDB, here's my field, and my name of John Doe. So with that, I'm actually going to add what's called a text box tool, which is really nice. I use these constantly because you can actually allow the end user to type information on their own using the text box tool. So I'm going to bring this in again about 2 tool heights above the text input tool. And in my question, I'm just going to type enter the full name. And I can keep some default text in there if I want to. So I can say John Doe for the default text. You can use this for password entry. So you can actually click mask the text for passwords, and it'll make those little dots that you see when you type in passwords on other software. So you have an option for that as well. And so now I've got this configured. And again, you want to add an action tool. So I want to have whatever full name the end user types to perform that action on the text input tool here, and actually update the text input tool. So I've got this action type, update value. Just want to update the value that's in this text input tool. And again, when you click on this, you're going to have a lot of information. This is getting into the coding behind the scenes of Alteryx. But what you want to input in this case is the data side. You want to get into the code, and you want to update the value of John Doe. And when you see replace a specific string down here, John Doe is entered, it looks fine. You don't need to modify that. So you don't have to check this box. The only time you would check the box is if you do have to modify or trim that string to something specific. And it is performing this update value here on this text input where it's John Doe currently. So this is really simple. We've got our workflow saved. We're going to create and run as the Analytic app. So I'm going to have enter the full name. Here's my question. I'm going to change that, and I'm just going to type in my own name. So again, a text box tool allows the end user to type in text. And so I'm just going to type my name, click finish. I've got my test YXDB, and it should have my name now in the name field. So that's a really simple example of how you allow your end user to enter the information using text, which is nice and simple. So again, the text box tool allows you to enter characters in a free-form text box. So they can actually put in whatever information they want to in that text box and change it into their parameters. I also want to show you something cool called the error message. So error messages are really nice. You can actually throw an error if something's not input the right way into your tools. So I'm going to pull in an error message tool here. And I want to connect it actually to my drop-down tool, or my text box tool. I was thinking about the drop-down there. So as you can see, the question output here connects to my error message here. And you can see there's a connection. And this is connection number 1. So you can see in my error message configuration, I've got a number 1 text box, enter the full name. So I actually want to make it to where there's an error if someone does not enter their name. So I want to say if it's empty, then this will throw an error. So what I need to do is type in my expression as empty. And then I'm going to say number 1. So connection number 1. So if the connection number 1 is empty, or if expression is true, display the following error message. So this is where the fun begins. You can actually, as the designer, make the error message whatever you want it to be. So you can type a nice error message, you can type a more imperative or commanding error message. I'm going to type, the name field is required, exclamation mark, making it a nice error message there. I am also going to go back and modify this to where we don't have default text in that text input tool or text box tool. That way there's nothing in there when you run the app. So again, I've set up my error message. It's based on an expression. So if number 1, connecting from this text box tool is empty, throw this error, the name field is required. So I'm going to go ahead and run. Since they enter the full name, I'm not going to put anything in there. I'm going to click finish. And here's your little error box. There were errors. The name field is required, imperative. So, but again, you can make that error anything you want in there. And that's kind of the fun part about errors. So I'm going to cancel that one. And I'm going to go really quickly to top county pay, just in the interest of time here. So this next one I'm going to show is really neat. It's going to allow the user to actually browse to their own file. So right now it's got some salary data for the county. You can see some employees and job titles, some base pay, and the county, which is listed in the agency field. And I'm going to just click that really quickly. It's ordering the records by total pay. It's finding the first record in the list, so the top paid employee. And in my output, I can see top paid employee per counties, and you can see my county name here. So we actually want to modify this and allow the end user to browse to their own tool. So I'm going to swipe over this, bring it down about 2 tools, and I'm actually going to go into what's known as the file browse tool. So this is really nice. This is a really fun tool and very useful. And I'm going to add this about 2 tools above my input tool. So again, you always want to set up your questions for that end user. And I'm going to type, select the file to analyze. And the neat thing is you can actually restrict these files. You can do spatial formats only. You can also do a field map for whatever's coming in that input data tool. And you can set up arbitrary file specifications. So right now, I want to make it to where they can only choose CSV. So in this same format here, I'm going to just type in CSV, and then parentheses, and then asterisk .csv. So that's selecting all, that's CSV. Then I'm going to add a pipe, and then I'm going to say asterisk .csv again. So this is again anything with that extension .csv. So I'm limiting it to where the end user can only pull in CSV files. So I'm going to add an action tool as usual. So we want to perform an action on that file browse. And with the action tool, we're going to keep the default of update input data tool. So we want it to just default and update that data tool there. So that's going to be really simple for that action tool. You can see there's other options, update XML or values with formulas and so on. But we just want to leave it as update the input data tool. It knows when you're connecting to a file browse to an input data tool to have this as the default action. So the next thing I'm going to do is a drop-down tool again. And this time I want to have a drop-down tool right above the sort tool. So I'm going to say, what field do they want to actually sort on? So I'm going to say, select the pay field. And then with my list values, I'm going to say file types in this Analytic App window. So what I wanted to do is actually look at what's coming in and actually give me fields based on what the input is that the end user has chosen. It's not the fields that are in the main input data tool. I want it to do a field map and actually map it back to what's coming in from what the end user chooses. So I'm going to say, connect this question of the input tool over to my dropdown for the question of the pay field. So this is a really useful thing. This is how you get it to map back to what's coming in from the tool and from the file browse tool. And you can actually have it mapped to whatever fields are coming in there. So I'm going to say for my values now, file browse in this Analytic App macro. So now it's realizing that it's connected to a file browse, and we want it to include fields of all the following types. You can actually uncheck some of these and show only the fields that you want to show. But for this, we'll actually keep it as default here and have need. So now that we've got this set, we're going to pull in an action tool to the sort tool. Again, you want to select the pay field and have an action performed on the records that are currently being sorted by total pay and benefits. So for that update value, instead of update field list, we're going to do update value, and we're going to go into the data again for our values, look at our field, and our current field is total pay and benefits. So we want the end user to choose their own pay field and not the one that's already set in the sort tool here. Again, when you have replaced a specific string, total pay and benefits is correct. I don't need to modify that, so I don't need to check this box. So I'm going to have my action configuration, and now that I've got my action ready, I'm going to do again a numeric up-down for that sample tool. And for the numeric up-down, I'm going to say select the number of records, or set the number of records to include from each group. And I'm going to keep it, let's see, at the defaults here, make it nice and simple for you. That way there's no changes there. And then we definitely want to add an action tool so that the end user, whatever they set in that numeric up-down, performs an action on that sort tool. So we're going to keep it at update value. Right now, the n equals 15 in that sort tool, and we're going to let it replace the specific string of 15. So again, you don't have to check that box. And now you've got your workflow together, we can actually run this Analytic App. So you can see here, I've got questions, I've got select the file to analyze. The file browse tool is going to give you a browse option or a dialog that comes up. You can select the pay field, you can set the number of records. So the cool thing is, you've got a pay field and there's nothing there because you haven't selected a file yet. So I'm going to go to a file, and I'm going to say, let's see, go back to my data. I'm going to say 2012 counties. Notice that it's only CSV files because in my file browse tool, I set it to only be CSV extensions. So the end user can only choose CSVs. I'm going to say, yeah, let's do 2012. And now my fields are updated. The reason my fields are updated is because I've connected my dropdown to my file browse. And it's showing me the fields that are in whatever file I selected. So I'm going to say, let's do overtime pay. I want to know who's getting paid the most by overtime. And I'm going to say number of records is 5. Click finish. Thinking about it. And then we've got our top earners, YXDB. And here's our data. So top 5 per county. Got my 5 here, and it's sorted by overtime pay. So you can see now I've got this sort. It's very quick, runs very fast, and I've made and I was allowed to browse using an open file dialog to whatever file I wanted to put in there, as long as it had a pay field. So again, that's really nice and simple, a really quick way of building apps and getting that interface for your end user and letting them choose what they want to do. Once you have your wizard, as I like to call it, or your analytic app saved, you can actually upload it to the gallery. So the way you would do that is you would actually say export workflow, or let me actually think about that. I'd have to think about that really quickly. Look at my export workflow. Sorry about that. And I should be able to actually upload it into my Analytic Apps. I'll have to go back to that for just a second because I have to get my advanced options going there. But for my output, when you actually upload it into the gallery, you actually go to, I'm going to show us the Technion gallery really quickly. And I'm going to sign in. So you can see our gallery here for Technion. This is our public facing page. But when I sign in, you'll actually see what I have in my gallery. So I'm going to put this together. And you can see I have a private studio. So you can see a lot of the apps I just built are actually already uploaded here into the gallery. So you would actually have your apps loaded this way into the gallery, and you would actually put them into, from your private studio, into collections. So I could spend more time on this, but in the interest of time, I'll give you a quick overview. But I've created these collections, and I can add users to these collections. So these are collections I made myself. I've got like a finance collection. And if I click on that collection, I can say users, and I can actually add users to this collection so that they can run the workflows inside of this collection. You can also see the ones that I've actually created. So this will look familiar, where we have top county pay and so on. Report on top and bottom earners. I'm going to run this top county pay, and you can see the interface. So this looks very familiar. Looks just like the app we just created, just a little bit different interface when it's running through the gallery. I'm going to browse. Let's see. Actually, I'll say, let's do 2013 counties.csv. I'm going to select my pay field. Again, I'll do overtime pay. I'm going to set the number of records to 3 this time, and then I'll click run. So this is what it looks like when it's running in the gallery. This you'll get a completed successfully checkbox there. And then since it was a YXDB, you actually immediately see your data. So I've got these 3 counties here, top of people by overtime pay, and then it switches to the next county. When you output it as a YXDB, Alteryx in the gallery also allows you to have other output options. So I could output this as a CSV, a Tableau data extract, for example. I'm going to click on CSV, and you'll see here at the bottom left, the CSV is downloaded, and I can actually open that. So if I click on that, it's going to launch Excel, and it's going to open it as a CSV file. I can also set that output in my app that I'm creating as Excel if I want to, and have it be only an Excel output. But here you can actually see I've got all my data ready to go, 3 per county, in an Excel or CSV format. And so that was nice and simple as well. So with that, I'll show you about the collections. You can create your collections and add users to them, and these have security so that users can actually only see the collections they have access to. So I can put 1 user here in finance, but they can't run any of the other apps in any of these other collections because they're not a member of those collections. There's also districts, and districts are public facing. And you can see here we have a banana district, which was not created by me, but it is part of our public-facing Technion district for people who can access our server. I created a spatial one, and so you can see I've got some apps in here. Again, for districts, these are public to your server. They're not public out to the world, but anyone who has access to your server can see what's on districts. However, collections are private. So when you add a user to one collection, they can only see the apps in that collection and run them. They cannot run any other collections. You can add multiple users to multiple collections though. So I can add 1 person to finance, reporting, and spatial analytics, and they can run the apps inside of those collections. So with that, I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I did want to show you as much as possible on Analytic Apps. I'm going to open it up for questions. And I did want to add, we do have a one-day training in advanced analytic apps available. So let us know if you're interested. We can either come to your office, you can come to ours, or we also do it virtually. So we can provide virtual training to you by WebEx. So let us know if you want more information on creating these analytic apps. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Joshua and I'll open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Dina. That was a really cool webinar. I learned a lot, and looks like we do have a few questions. Arathi, actually not a question, but just a comment. He says that's really cool piece of trivia about wands and wizards, and I didn't know that either, so that was cool.
That's great, thank you.
We do have a question here that says, what if sometimes the user wants one option from the dropdown and the other times the user wants multiple options from the dropdown? Can you change from equal to in to allow that? Or along the same line, multiple options in a text box? Can you repeat, reshow where the recording will be saved? So yeah, we'll definitely come back to the recording. But in the meantime, yeah, multiple options. Is that possible?
You can, and that's an excellent question. Yes, I like how you're thinking, because yes, with the drop-down, you get one option, but you can use a list box. And a list box allows the users to make multiple selections. They can check as many boxes as they want in that list box. So yes, very good question on that. And I encourage you to play around with the list box. It's got a different kind of configuration than the drop-down, but pretty easy to get into and start figuring out.
All right, cool. Also, there's a question here. Is there a way to provide a pop-up with a message when an analytic app is completed?
There is actually. So you can actually set up in your workflow a message. So you can actually go into, let's see, I believe it's your developer tools. You can actually set up a message to write log messages to the window. You can make it a macro if you need to. And you can actually say on success, pop up this message. So there are options for that. And there's also other options inside of the interface designer. So if you go here to your interface designer, to your properties, there's on success, show results to user. And you can open the files from these tools as your results from the user. And speaking of on success, you can chain your apps. So you can make one app, and if it is successful, on success, run another app. And you simply browse and navigate to that other app that you actually wanted to have them browse to. So that's a great way to chain your apps. Again, it's on success. If the first app runs successfully, it immediately runs the next app, and you can have multiple chains. So very good question on that, on getting it to send a message on success to you.
All right. I have posted the link where the recording will show in the chat, so you can grab it there. Also, you should, if you registered, which you would have had to be part of the webinar, you should get an email in a day or two when that recording is available, and you can use that link to see previous recordings as well. One more question I see here. When using the text box, can you enter multiple entries?
Let's see, I believe you can. It's on the, I'll do the user entry form. Let me close this interface here. So on your text box, I believe you have an option for multi-line. So you can enter the text on the question and then have it be multi-line. I haven't played around with that as much as I could. I'm definitely going to research that more, and I'll post a bit of information on that as well. So I'll put some information on our Technion blog about analytic apps, and I'll research this one. But I think you can, for the text box, actually have it be multi-line.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for the questions. And if anyone thinks of anything after the webinar is over, we'd be happy to hear from you, and feel free to reach out to us. In the meantime, I'll show one closing thing, which will also show the link, but also some details on how you can reach out to Dina. And then other than that, I think we are at an end for today. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we enjoy sharing with you and the community our knowledge. Thank you, Dina, for such a wonderful webinar, and we'll see you all next time. Oh, and drop by the Technion booth at Tableau Conference if you're there. Dina and I will be presenting on data prep using Alteryx and Tableau prep, and maybe some other cool things along the way as well. See you next time.